The next person I'd like to introduce, who's going to give us a little primer here on kind of the grander decentralized science ecosystem, is Paul Kohlhass. Paul is the CEO of Molecule and recently BioProtocol. BioProtocol recently raised $33 million to incubate what's called BioDAOs, and Paul's going to tell us a little bit more about these kind of like community curated and community run organizations in various field specific domains, with many different goals, primarily centered around this idea of like funding underfunded areas, or really taking on like really moonshot ideas. And as many of you know, the NIH often funds a lot of studies and they throw a lot of money towards things, but a lot of time these things are very incremental in what they're trying to take on. That Paul's been in the space, the decentralized science space, probably before it was called decentralized science. Paul, please give us a deeper look into what's going on in the ecosystem and what you guys have got going on.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. It's actually, is Patrick in the room? Patrick, when did you start ResearchHub? 2018?
Yes, we're working around then.
Awesome, yeah. Yeah. So I started in this topic right around the same time. There's an article called Token Bonding Curves for IP, which was published in mid-2018, which actually for the first time talks about this concept of what happens when we, instead of financializing pictures of cats on the blockchain, as we've done now for a couple of years, we instead financialize or open up the ownership of intellectual property. Very few quick words about myself. My background to be working in science is a bit atypical. I spent a lot of my teenage years in different like online biohacking forums. These were the early Reddits dedicated to specific fields. I was actually in a hair loss Reddit for a while, and then there was I don't have hair loss, but I can't grow a beard. So as a teenager, I was trying to figure that out. Then nootropics, longevity, for instance, but also like diabetes patients, for instance. Found that fascinating. Had a grandmother who took metformin and was diabetic, and this gave birth to the open insulin movement, for instance, where now people around the United States are kind of producing their own insulin at home. In other cases, HIV communities developing their own gene therapies. Tristan was one of those early people working there, so it's amazing. And the common thread around all of them that I found super fascinating were like these people online that either are there out of sheer curiosity or out of need because the current system isn't meeting their needs. Went on actually then and studied economics originally, so never studied anything scientific. In that sense, economics can be very scientific though, and started trading biotech stocks during my studies. Found that super fascinating, had completely the opposite experiences in those open communities. If you've ever traded biotech stocks, it's very difficult to get any accurate or real information about these companies. Their release cycles are very slow, and then you're basically trading the burn rate of the company until like positive data emerges, and it's like 5x, or it's minus 80, 90% in a day. Not too dissimilar to crypto. as we'll find out today. And so some of us, whoever works in crypto, we work in crypto. I think we invest in crypto or things like Bitcoin because we believe in sovereignty ultimately, in liberty, in open source access, and in freedom of speech. And because something is being taken from us slowly and silently. This is a slight reference to the amount of inflation that we've seen over the past 3 or 4 years, and kind of Bitcoin being an alternative to that. And I think science and medicine are kind of trapped in very similar power structures. I think biopharma is deemed as one of these systems that is simply too big to change. I think someone previously said this today, consumes about 18.5% of US GDP. I think around 50% or less goes into like the direct sales of pharmaceuticals. And all of this is entrenched by a 19th century era patent system. There's actually one big upgrade of the patent system, which is in the 1950s. And it's kind of the fundamental kind of driver for innovation today still. And we think that there is better ways to do this. So how does the system work? Treatments and recurring revenue today really dominate healthcare. So Goldman Sachs wrote a really famous article in 2018, or that got a lot of attention, that is titled, "Is Curing Patients a Sustainable Business Model?" And in that article, they analyzed a large pharmaceutical company who had just launched a new cure for hepatitis C. Previously, that same companies had had a bunch of treatments on the market that treated hepatitis C, and they made a bunch of money with those treatments. Now, they cured it, and it's a 6-month pill. if you've it's a 6-month treatment through simply taking a pill. And so the previous customer base that they had, that they were selling these treatments to, didn't exist anymore. Goldman Sachs said, and a bunch of other companies also had treatments, and so they kind of harmed the market. But moreover, Goldman Sachs then downgraded the company. A few executives at the time were fired because they developed a cure. And so the system that we have today really disincentivizes cures, and it needs lifelong customers. There's another chart that you can see this in really well, unfortunately, which is the overdose deaths in the United States involving prescription opioids. Still takes about 15 to 20,000 lives, just prescription opioids. We're not even talking about the black market. So these are the externalities of a system that disincentivizes cures. On the other side, the scientists that we spend talking to say they spend 80% of their time applying for funding and 20% doing the science. Imagine if you worked in software development and you spent 80% of the time asking for people to give you money or access to some software that you could then use to write code. We'd live in a very different system. Today, software is ubiquitous and kind of free and open access. I think Brian said this earlier today. What if biotech or what if science was much more like software development? Well, because we have wetware, it's just much harder to do. So scientists need funding. And that's one of the main things I actually want to talk about today, how we can make things like what John just spoke about actually a reality. Another big hypothesis that I have is that most of the world's potential scientific talent remains untapped. It's kind of funding is concentrated around some major universities around the globe. Some of the most exciting innovation that we've actually found in our ecosystem comes from the places that you wouldn't expect it from. And there's brilliant scientific talent all over the world. It's so hard for them to get funding or even get attention. Some of the scientists that we speak to, they go to conferences physically and make papers that they put up, hoping that someone will see their science. And that's still a major way of how science is discovered in 2024. And I know for many people this is normal, but like when I started reading this, I was like, this can't be it. The analogy to me is like as if you were going around a town where you're looking for an apartment and you're like looking out for the signs like room free. There's still places where that's done. But yeah, so I think we live in a time of science friction, not of science fiction. And so we really want to get into that. I really like this example. So this was published in Nature recently. There was a scientist who treated her own cancer with viruses she grew in the lab. I'm sure many of you saw that news. I'll just read it out here. In choosing to self-experiment, Halassi, so she treated her stage 3 ovarian cancer with a virus she developed herself. And Halassi joins a long line of scientists who practice this under the radar, stigmatized and ethically fraught practice. Took a brave editor to even publish the report. So we wouldn't even know about this if not one editor had said, okay, this is a really fraught practice, don't do this. And then there's a funny Twitter post that says, scientist does science, cures cancer, the science TM, no, you can't do that. And then we wonder why scientists are fleeing academia. So what DeSci for me really is about, it's about permissionless science. Like why should someone ask for permission to self-experiment? And like why are we not making this much bigger? So there is hope. So this is what I'll actually start with. So this just happened in the last 48 hours. So DeSci is having really quite a moment in terms of like funding that is pouring into the space. And it was funded on Base, which I know is one of the sponsors here today. So I'm excited to unveil it. So in the last 48 hours, we had about $1.4 million that was put into 7 different research projects. These include a research project in Alzheimer's, in brain tissue regrowth, actually at the lab that John just mentioned. So John Baer's lab at Albert Einstein Medical College. Another one is from University of Tel Aviv, King's College London. A range of projects. You can look at them on molecule.catalyst.xyz. And each of these projects actually represents commercializable IP, very early stage research projects though, but with a full experimental plan. So each of these projects raised between $80,000, in some cases up to $400,000. The last one closed within 30 minutes. So there's actually a huge appetite for the public to participate in how science is funded, and then ultimately how science is governed. Very quick, what is it that we do? So I represent 2 organizations that work together in unison. One is Molecule, which is really a protocol and exchange of how intellectual property, specifically scientific IP and data, can come on chain. And the other one, and I'll get deeper into that today, is Bio, which is a curation and liquidity engine for on-chain scientific communities. So we'll hear about a bit how these scientific communities work, but the overlying goal is really to create new community-centric launchpads that enable groups of scientists, patients, enthusiasts to come together and begin building new types of research organizations in specific fields. These are typically called BioDAOs. So if you Google BioDAO, you'll find a lot of information about them by now. So BioDAOs really, in the same way that a biotech or a pharmaceutical company or any other research organization might work, is they build communities, which then attract research from all over the globe. They build an on-chain IP portfolio, and then they can monetize that IP in a variety of ways. They can sell the IP on. So they typically focus on bridging the valley of death. And then they can sell the IP on, they can monetize it, they can retokenize it, or they can actually develop products. So one of our leading BioDAOs actually is a community called HairDAO. So within a year and a half, they filed for 2 patents. They've discovered completely new hair regrowth therapies. They ran a decentralized clinical trial with the University of Miami. And they created their own shampoo. It's an anti-inflammatory shampoo. And you have a huge community now of people, of both patients and scientists, that are collaborating together in a Discord server and trying to cure hair loss. VitaDAO is one of the most prolific, or one of the first research organizations. VitaDAO actually helped coin the term DeSci, as it's known today. These are some of the featured projects. One is with the Cybernutzen Lab at the University of Copenhagen. Another one was with the University of Oslo. Another one is with the University of Newcastle. Newcastle University actually took us 3 weeks from first talking to the researcher to the IP being fully out-licensed and the university receiving the money in their bank account. The Korolchak project looks at autophagy activators. So it's developing new molecules that activate autophagy in the body. And the preliminary data that we now have 2 years later, science takes a long time. This was funded in late 2021. The preliminary data that we have 2 years later is that this compound is 2 to 3 times more effective than rapamycin, which is the main other known longevity compound. So since 2023, our team has helped them launch over 6 more of these BioDAOs. It's actually 6 that have in total raised over $13 million and are today valued at over an over 200 million market cap. I think we'll hear from some of our newest BioDAO funders later, but if you know anyone that is interested in creating a global online community like this, please let us know. As I said, one of them is HairDAO, and another one is AthenaDAO, which is focused on women's health and reproductive research. We have one called ValleyDAO, focused on synthetic biology. One called CerebrumDAO, focused on brain health and neuroscience. One called SciDAO, focused on psychedelic research. And actually, we're really excited to also be closely collaborating with the ResearchHub team. So ResearchHub for us surfaces kind of idea flow in DeSci, and it can fuel the BioDAO research pipelines. It also enables validation through peer reviews and kind of funding micro experiments. And it powers kind of growing research networks and brings scientists on chain. So we actually had one of our BioDAOs, AthenaDAO, bring 3 researchers on to 3 AthenaDAO researchers joined ResearchHub and had their preprints funded through ResearchHub. And from when I first spoke with Patrick, or was it you, Jeff, about it, you guys said it was some of the best researchers that had come onto ResearchHub to date that actually come through these communities, because they come with a very different background and focus. And I actually think that's one of the powers of DeSci. It's like really building collaborative open frameworks. So what are we doing with Bio? Bio is really blending DeFi and DeSci together. If you haven't heard of what DeFi is, DeFi stands for decentralized finance. Was one of the first big use cases so far that we've seen in the crypto space. And we colloquially call this new category, which is science finance or sci-fi. Make science sci-fi again. And so Bio, what is Bio? Bio is an autonomous community-owned launchpad. You can kind of imagine this like a leaderboard where early DAO communities can form, and they rise up and down this leaderboard. And as they rise on the leaderboard, they get supplied with more and more tooling. They reach the top of the leaderboard and they kind of graduate and then become an autonomously kind of openly openly traded and governed community. We have some really exciting upcoming launches. We'll actually hear from two of the founders that are here today. One is Rohan Dixit from Long COVID Labs. Rohan is working on a cure for long COVID, affects a huge global patient population in the aftermath of the COVID-19 epidemic. We have another one called Quantum Biology DAO with Clarice D'Aiello, world's leading researcher in the field of quantum biology. I'll let her give an intro just now. And then we have a last one called Curetopia from Ethan Perlstein. He's also based in the Bay Area. Ethan has worked with families that suffer from rare diseases. He's actually successfully brought rare disease therapeutics into stage 3 clinical trials. And so what is the common denominator here? In each of these common denominators, you have a field that is really underfunded, that is underserved by the current industry, that just doesn't get enough attention, but that actually has really thriving scientific or patient communities around it that need help. And that's one of the things that excites me the most. So let's look at what does Bio actually do? So Bio helps incubate these different DAOs, and then each of the DAOs has a research portfolio. VitaDAO's research portfolio as of today is actually valued at over 22 million. And VitaDAO's raised 9 million, and it still has a treasury left of about $3 million. So we're actually starting to see the R&D efficiency of these organizations can be quite positive. And any and all proceeds that these organizations generate from their R&D activities are reinvested into the DAOs. You can kind of think of them as similar as like university and DAO-ments. But so now what actually happens here at the individual level? This is kind of the typical innovation and drug development cycle today. It's a very typical framework used in innovation handbooks, like how do organizations or companies come up with ideas. And then at the bottom, you kind of have this typical 10-year, $2 billion drug development cycle. What's really interesting is if you think about the development of cures, for instance, for cancer, we have all of these organizations around the world that are all doing work for global diseases or global problems in silos, right? Biotech is very under NDA. People don't talk to each other. They don't share ideas. So all of this entire innovation cycle is happening in a silo. What the DAOs do is they actually open that up. So you have an entire community now that is looking at all of these portfolio assets and really figuring out what's going to work, what's not going to work, actively analyzing the data. So what does one actual project in here represent? So we've developed a framework which is called an IP NFT, which you can kind of think of a Lego block for DeSci. IP NFTs are essentially can think of them like on-chain very malleable patent portfolios, which essentially takes an NFT and almost attaches a decentralized Google Drive to it and a legal agreement that you can now openly share with other contributors without invalidating the underlying IP. It's kind of what it looks like from a more technical perspective. Basically, you have a legal contract, you have a smart contract, and then you have a data storage. Not too complicated at that level. We can take this one step further. And I'll just go here because in DeSci, I think it's really important to keep experimenting and essentially keep creating incentives to move deeper and deeper at the lower levels. The next stage that we can do is we can essentially create a tokenized wrapper, a governance wrapper around an individual research project. We call these IPTs. So you can kind of imagine an NFT, if you've ever held one, is not divisible, or you don't have, an NFT by design is non-fungible. And so now what we create is we create fungibility around individual research projects. These are called IPTs, and they can now be exchanged for work around the project, for further funding, or for individual contributions. IPTs in that sense really enable open source collaboration without losing any of the commercial viability around a project. I'll go quickly into one case study. It's why I think this actually starts getting really interesting. So this is a case study from VitaDAO. VitaDAO received investment from Pfizer in January 2023. The reason why Pfizer invested is because they saw a really interesting portfolio of IP emerging and a large scientific community. And so they brought in a scientist themselves that they thought, this is really interesting, you guys should check this out. And this guy's name is Michael Torres. He was doing really interesting work around mutation-specific codon suppression, and requested $90,000 for initial in silico studies. The DAO funded this in May 2023. And the initial data that came out of this looked really good. Essentially, he was focused on the development of an mRNA gene therapy. And so in January this year, the DAO decided to kind of do a follow-on financing for it. Decided to do a follow-on financing, and it raised $300,000 from the community of token holders at a 1.5 million valuation, roughly. And so at this point, real IP was actually starting to be developed from this initial project. Then what happens in crypto, or like what we do with these things, is they now become publicly tradable. And so a DEX liquidity pool was launched in June of this year, which stabilized at roughly at a 3 million valuation. And then what the researchers started doing, once more data came out, you now have this mini community around an asset, and he started regularly publishing the data. If you're a token holder in this project, you can now join these community calls. You can also sign an NDA. You can very actively look at the data. You can discuss it. And the data that started coming out started looking really good and very positive. And the research is now continuously able to raise follow-on financing through this mechanism. Or he's able to define bounties. We hired a CEO into the project. He's able to hire other postdocs that are able to work on this. We ran another really interesting experiment lately, which, if you want to look it up, it's called pump.science. And it plays to a very different kind of user base. So pump.science is trying to answer how quickly can we test longevity drugs with novel communities. So you'll see a bunch of different compounds on here. We ran 2 compounds recently. One is rifampicin and another is urolithin A. But I'll very quickly just explain you how it works. A scientist somewhere, and this could be a hobby or a citizen scientist, has an idea for a new longevity cocktail. He then lists the compound on pump.science. He can now fundraise for an experiment around that compound using a bonding curve. We partnered with a company called Aura Biomedical. They're actually based in SF, and they developed a device called the Wormbot. The Wormbot provides automated high throughput imaging of a C. elegans experiment. And so a user can now suggest a compound, we'll synthesize, you can send that compound in, or we order it. It then gets auto-dropped into this experiment. And then there's a live stream on the pump.science website where people can now watch the live stream, and a token is deployed representing that experiment and any IP generated in that experiment. We launched a second experiment with this for experiments in flies. And then the next step after that will be mice. And I'll leave you with this last data point. This was launched last Friday. And these 2 compounds generated over $1.1 billion in volume. I don't know either. So these are still early experiments, but the appetite, I think what this number 1.1 billion in volume tells us, so this is 1.1 billion in trading volume back and forth on this compound. Probably had over 30, 40, 50,000 people within hours begin participating in this experiment. Fundamentally, we're building towards a world where scientists can spend 80% doing the science and 20% applying for funding. These people that are trading the volume here, they're the ones that are paying for the experiments, because now they're invested. They want to see the mice experiment. They want to see the next experiment. And I think that starts getting really interesting. And where anyone can fund and participate in science, independent of institution and geography, which I think is incredibly important. Cool, thank you.
Yeah, awesome, Paul. We'll maybe give like a few minutes if anyone, we got a couple questions out in the audience, we can start there, and then we'll kind of close everything out with the DeSci panel.
Very interesting talk. Thanks for the presentation. I was just wondering, it seemed that all of the examples were based in the biotech industry and related. I was wondering if there's anything related to medical devices and the sort.
That's a really interesting question. We have not done anything in medical devices yet. Initially, as an entrepreneur, I've learned it's so important to pick your niche, and these communities thrive through network effects, right? But we've already started branching out into other areas. And there's nothing actually that would stop us from doing anything in medical devices. If you have a great idea, would love to chat.
Yeah, happy to talk afterwards.
Yeah, 100%. I've heard people mention it a few times. I think the IP landscape probably for medical devices is different than, for instance, for molecules. But I actually think it's just ultimately it's just a legal engineering question. The frameworks that we're developing can be the legal frameworks or IP frameworks can be applied to anything.
Yeah, that's a great point. If I can add a follow-up question on that, this notion of IP tokenization, it relies on USPTO eventually granting that patent, right? Because until that moment, it's just the potential of that IP being granted or a provisional application being done. So I was just curious if you have any experience or any of these projects have actually gone through getting a patent granted within this framework.
100%. We have one organization that I don't know if the patent's been granted yet. That normally takes too long, but it's definitely been. Do you know what the status has been?
I'm not sure. I think
one has been granted. But so with patenting, you actually want to delay patenting as long as you can. And so we always work with scientists that haven't filed for a patent yet because there's often they patent to publish. And then with patent, you really want to make sure at the point that you patent that you have a super solid IP strategy. And by the way, I wouldn't preface this by saying I actually really dislike patents and the patent system and everything around it. But it's kind of like what we have right now. And I think we would need to develop IP so quickly and then commercialize it so quickly that the patents actually become irrelevant. But my ultimate dream would be zero knowledge IP, where you don't even need to disclose what the underlying thing is in order for other people to work on it. We definitely need more cases around this, but the IP is kind of almost in our case protected in a mini community, and then we still use the same NDAs that you would sign if you worked at a company that was developing anything for IP.
My name is Vincent. I'm coming from France. As you said, Paul, thank you for your presentation. There is a huge momentum in terms of financial interest in DeSci, and we know that we are in a part of the cycle of cryptocurrency that is only up for I don't know, and nobody knows. How do you anticipate? Sorry?
Until it goes down.
Until it goes down. And then 90% of the person are broke. But anyway, how do you anticipate as a decentralized science founder all these high and lows of the cycle?
100%. And it's something we think about a lot in terms of how do we protect researchers from this and actually also have them really focused on the science, and at the same time have any market participants that choose to interact with these tokens also know what they're getting into, meaning the risks associated with early stage biotech investing. So the DAOs that we're building are actually really good, I think really good vehicles for the public, for community members, for people to get involved in, because they have treasuries and then they create portfolios of research that are community owned. Yeah. And in those cases, if you actually look historically over the past 1.5 in the past 3 years of DAOs existing, they have been very stable compared to the rest of the crypto market. And it's because actually what you end up having, so many people are often scared of crypto because it's wild and parts of that are true, but actually the type of funders that come into these DAOs are really long-term and patient capital. That's at least our experience. That's what we've seen. I think now when it comes to parts like tokenizing experiments that are short-lived, I think there's different dynamics that are starting to play out. And ultimately, I think, so I fundamentally really believe in open markets. The other really important thing to obviously consider is what is regulation around this? When we create tokens, they always only represent governance rights. There is kind of no underlying in that sense. It's governance rights that are community owned. Ultimately, so any community can govern and choose what they want to do with that research. And our biggest hope is actually that in many cases, for instance, when it's a specific new drug that affects a specific patient group, the most important thing is actually to get the right stakeholders into those, like into those research assets.
Thank you very much, and thank you for
Did
the
I answer your question?
Yeah. I mean, congratulations for the Bio Bible, because it's written, like everything is written. You recommend like 70% of stablecoins inside the treasury of a DAO in order to have like this kind of stability. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Hi. Thanks a lot. I'm really sensitive to the problems that you pointed out, like the way that the current market does not incentivize biopharma to produce socially productive and needed outcomes right now. I'm wondering, though, how this model is going to solve those problems as opposed to just introducing new market problems related to information asymmetries, for example. And also, you mentioned the scientists perhaps, hopefully spending 80% of their time on research and 20% of their time on fundraising. But why would that not go to marketing? And why would that time not go to marketing for crowdfunding, essentially? And you partially answered some of my questions surrounding this when you mentioned that empirically you're seeing that the funders who are involved in these DAOs are actually seem to be people who have a long-term vision, which is interesting. I was involved in a scientific computing startup in the past, and it was partially funded via a token sale. And that was a huge problem that we had, was that there was a lot of short-termism. And so it was difficult to kind of keep that going. There were other problems there too, but yeah.
What you just mentioned, actually, so I've been building in this space for over 6 years, and it's very difficult for scientists to come in and navigate it. And that's really what we're trying to build, and where we're trying to help is like find great scientific founders or scientists that need funding. To come to your first question, which is like, why would this system incentivize cures? When I first actually started thinking about this, there's he's kind of like a developer and an architect of one of the early systems, which are called bonding curves. And bonding curves are used as curation markets. They've actually become very prevalent in the curation and trading of memes. And so a bonding curve is a kind of an automated market maker that you can use for very early stage price discovery. And the creator of this proposed it for memes. And because memes become Schelling points. And so a Schelling point is the point in a market or in a system where attention naturally converges. And a cure is a Schelling point. If someone says, I have a cure, people are going to pay a lot of attention, right? And they're going to start looking at that. And naturally, if in an open market, if a cure emerges, people would naturally allocate capital to that cure, right? It's what makes the most sense. In the current system, cures are not incentivized, and they're often disincentivized. We spoke to a researcher at Scripps a couple of years back, and she had a non-addictive opioid analgesic. So this could have been a replacement to methadone, but also been a replacement to a lot of the other opioids on the market. She said, and this was advanced research, like Scripps had funded a bunch of groups because they were all like, this is incredible. This could kind of make a huge impact on the opioid crisis. She said she could not get any commercial funding whatsoever. No VC that she talked to would touch this. She'd spoken to a company, but then realized the company just wanted to shelve it. And none of the VCs said that they would touch it. So the system that we have today, if a cure emerges, this is known, like companies have an incentive to kind of bury it, or it'll just never get funding. And so in an open capital system, capital would naturally flow to the cures and then begin generating more and more data about them because they would become Schelling points for capital. That's my thesis, at least, because this happens on the stock market, right? If Tesla says we have robots now and we have this and that, people are like, cool, take my money. And I think that the same thing could happen here. At least that's my hypothesis. And then your second question was, isn't this going to take a lot of time from researchers and scientists? I think the scientists actually that can play that game the best will be the most successful, meaning scientists that can create communities around what they're doing and get other people excited. That's a difficult skill. However, what we're also already seeing in this ecosystem is that if a great idea comes and the scientists can't do that well, other people will quickly take it and run with it because there's financial upside now around the commercialization, around sharing of the concept, right? You're not creating a biotech company that then has a cap table of 10 people and a biotech VCs and a few angels, but like you're immediately enabling this up to be owned by tens, hundreds of people, often scientific experts that are within the DAO. So if something good emerges and the scientists can't market it themselves, there are people now in these communities that will run with it very quickly. And then the researchers completely left to do their science. In fact, I'd say probably the researchers that have been funded through the DAOs probably spend way less time writing some grant update thingy to unlock another milestone than some of the scientists that we funded. And then the advantages for the scientists is they actually join an open community where people are really excited about their work, and they're excited about it from a commercial perspective, but not from an like, when do we do your A series kind of, or like, how can we 100x this, but like from a much more genuine scientific curiosity, but paired with a commercial mindset. Sorry, that was long.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. A round of applause for Paul. And then